Can you imagine falling in love when you're almost 70 years old? Here's the first chapter of my novel, Caramel Kisses. Mimi didn't deserve this. Heck, nobody did. But especially not Mimi. Not his Mimi. Michael Gray fingered the crisp white sheet before sliding his hand underneath and grasping her wrinkled fingers. He gripped the railing of the hospice bed with his other hand. He sniffed. The vivid sense of rubbing alcohol and antiseptic filled the air as he studied her small chest barely moving. She breathed from the oxygen tubes through her nose. He briefly glanced at their wedding picture, which was displayed beside her bed. They'd been in love, young, and he just joined the Navy. He focused on Mimi again. Her vitals were no longer stable, and hospice had called him, letting him know that she didn't have much time left. That's why he'd rushed over as soon as he could. He eased into the chair beside the bed and continued holding her hand. Her eyes fluttered open. Her dark brown eyes focused on him with unusual clarity. Michael. Just hearing his name softly uttered from her sweet lips made his heart skip. Don't talk, Mimi. She barely nodded and closed her eyes. Her nut-brown skin looked a bit waxy and laugh lines fanned from her eyes. Up until a few months ago, his Mimi was always laughing, happy, talkative. She loved running the bakery with him, and she made a mean batch of candy. They'd often sold her candies right beside their baked goods in their privately owned bakery. Although they'd been married 40 years, she still shooed him from the kitchen whenever she made her candy. She still kept her recipe a secret from him after all these years. At 68, his Mimi would be breathing her last breath, passing on into heaven within the next few hours, according to hospice. Michael, she struggled to open her eyes again. The staff had warned him over the last few weeks that his Mimi would not be herself due to the level of medications that they were giving her. Honey, don't talk. Thankfully, her eyes closed again. He studied her, the memories rushing through his mind like warm sunshine. He recalled the first time he met Emilia Rose Sanderson. It was back in 1963 during the March for Civil Rights in Washington. They'd only been 16 years old, and he'd been enamored with her smooth brown skin and deep, soulful eyes. With her sultry voice, full of courage, she told him she was called Mimi. As they fought for civil rights, he thought of her as his Mimi. They'd married 2 years later and had been together ever since. So many years, so many memories. They'd shared so much. He continued clutching her hand. Salty wetness slid down his cheeks. So many good years. He stood on his shaky legs and kissed her cheek. Yes, he'd spent most of his life with his Mimi. It had been a good marriage. His only regret was that they'd never been blessed with any children. He squeezed his eyes shut, unable to stop the stream of tears. He'd imagined his grief wouldn't be as raw if he'd had children and grandchildren who'd love Mimi too. Michael, she mumbled his name again. Listen to me. He lowered his ear toward her lips. Baby, I have a baby. A baby? What in the world was she talking about? They'd never had any children, so maybe she was confused. She was probably thinking of all the time and effort they'd put into trying to have a child. Mimi, it's okay. You're confused. Just close your eyes and get some rest. No. She grabbed his hand with surprising strength. Baby. Make sure baby is okay. Bank. Safe deposit at the bank. She then dropped his hand and closed her eyes. She had a baby. How could that be? As his Mimi stopped breathing, tears slid down his cheeks. Lord, I'm so hurt and confused right now. Please help me with this pain. Amen.